Section 20. The second branch is this, that as some ages might mistake the doctrines of their fathers, so they might knowingly deliver to their posterity, not the doctrine they received from their ancestors, but some other. And of this many reasons may be given, but I shall confine myself to 3. Section 21. First, it might be from God's just judgment, giving men up to believe that what was false. That is, that such doctrines did come from the apostles by their ancestors, which indeed did not. Nay, what these men would needs persuade us was impossible, the Holy Ghost hath assured us is certain and future. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 10, 11, and 12. Because they receive not the truth in the love of it, God shall send strong delusions that they should believe a lie. A place more considerable, because it is particularly leveled at the Romish faction, as might be evidently shown, if it were not extravagant from my present business, that the character here described suits with the quality of diverse ages forementioned, that is, that they were such as did not receive the truth in the love of it, that they had pleasure in unrighteousness. He that reviews what hath been here said will find no cause to doubt, and therefore that the judgment here denounced should be inflicted upon them is no more than what might be expected from the faithfulness of God and the usual course of his providence. And if they might believe other lies of greater importance, the more dangerous consequence, why might they not believe such a lie as this, that is, that a doctrine came from the apostles, which indeed did not? And because the generality of the forementioned ages, the clergy and popes not excepted, were apparently guilty of the sins here deciphered, and consequently obnoxious to the judgment here predicted. Therefore it is intolerable impudence to assert that those men were infallibly guided into all truth, whom that God, who cannot lie, hath threatened to give up to believe lies, of which this is not the least considerable and dreadful, to believe such persons to be infallible. Section 22. Secondly, the greatest part of the Church in one age might knowingly recede from the doctrine of their immediate ancestors and deliver another doctrine to their posterity, because they might believe that the churches and fathers of the next foregoing age might fall into some errors, for that which is actually believed by Protestants now might possibly be believed by the fathers then. Ab esse ad posse valet argumentum. And this is sufficient for the answer of this argument, in the defense of our case, but ex abundante, I add, that de facto this was the faith of the greatest part of the Church, and writers in some ages, as I have already shown out of the undeniable testimonies, to which I shall only add 2 or 3 passages out of Cyprian, by which the reader may evidently discern how little weight was then laid upon that which is now said to be infallible, tradition, and the testimony of the present Church. Tradition indeed was the plea urged by the Bishop of Rome against Cyprian and the African bishops. Now mark what the reply is. 2 things Cyprian answers. Number 1, that they of Rome did not observe all ancient traditions, and this, saith he, appears from their opinion about Easter, which, by the way, discovers the vanity of that supposition which they lay as a basis of the present position, that is, that the Church of Rome delivers nothing but what she professeth to have received from her ancestors. Secondly, he answers that this was but a human tradition, and therefore not infallible. And it is considerable that he writes thus to the Pope, by which we may sufficiently understand what was Cyprian's judgment and the faith of that age concerning the infallibility of tradition, and also, as also of the Pope and the Church of Rome. And conformable to Cyprian's was the decision of the whole Council of Carthage, when truth is manifest, say they, let custom yield to truth, and although hitherto none did baptize heretics in the Church, now let them begin to baptize them. And in another place, Cyprian, speaking out of the custom, of mixing wine and water in the sacrament, hath these words, nor should any one think that the custom of some is to be followed, for we are to inquire whom they followed, for only Christ is to be followed. And he adds, that we are not to regard what others have done before us, but what Christ, who is before us all, first did. For we must not follow men's customs, but God's truth. And in another place he positively asserts that when anything is out of order, the only way to be satisfied is to go to another. The only way to be satisfied is to go to the fountain, to the head and original of divine tradition, to evangelical and apostolical tradition. From all which it undeniably follows that Cyprian and his brethren did not judge the tradition of the next preceding age infallible, nor the testimony of the present church sufficient, as these gentlemen now do. And consequently, though it might introduce opinions contrary to what they received from their ancestors, when by these allegations it appears as plainly as if it were written with a sunbeam, they judged it liable to mistakes and errors. This is the very doctrine of the Protestants. Section 23. Thirdly, there might be an argument and design amongst many persons and eminent members of the Church to corrupt the doctrine received from their ancestors for their worldly interest and carnal ends, of which almost all ages afford us woeful and innumerable instances. With the reader's leave, I will exemplify this proposition in a notorious instance in a doctrine of great concernment, which is the Perora and Puppis, the foundation stone and cornerstone of the Romish religion, and if you will take Bellarmine's word, necessary to salvation. I mean the Pope's supremacy. I beg the reader's pardon if I do a little more largely insist upon it than my manner is, because the story is remarkable, and strikes at the root of this novel conceit concerning the impossibility of a wilful disposition. Mr. White tells us the Church cannot be deceived in tradition, and especially the Church and Bishop of Rome, who by the consent of all the Papists, have been the most faithful conservators of tradition. The Papists generally agree that they have an authentic and universal tradition on the behalf of the Pope's supremacy, of which the right of appeals is a principal branch and the greatest evidence. And this tradition, say they, came to them from the apostles by the fathers of all ages successively. Well then, to come to the story, in the year 417, there was a famous council at Carthage, owned by Bellarmine and Baronius, by the name of the General Council of Carthage, consisting of 217 bishops, among whom was Alias and St. Austin. Zosimus, being pope at that time, sends his legates thither, and pretends a right of appeals from the African churches to himself at Rome. To make this good, he allegeth for it some of the canons of the Council of Nicaea, which he ascends no higher. The more silly wretch he. For if the doctrine of the present Church of Rome be true, he might have brought that which was more evident and irresistible than 100 canons of Nicaea, which now all the world rings of, and all their discourses are fully fraught with. That is, the institution of Christ, the supremacy of Peter devolved upon him, the universal tradition of the whole Church. But of all these, here is autem silentium. For you must conceive these were arguments laid up in store, like the treasure in St. Mark's chest, for some high future exigencies, were wisely reserved for a season wherein the world should wonder after the beast, and be most capable of such impressions. Well, the fathers consider his petition, for as yet the popes were not masters of their art, and had not learned their lesson in volumes, statumus, mandamus, and marvel at the proposition and tell Faustus and his colleagues that they find no such canons in their copies of the Council of Nicaea, as were alleged, and had indeed been forged at Rome, as is acknowledged even by the Popish Council of Florence. Hereupon a motion is made and agreed that they send forthwith to the bishops of Constantinople, Alexandria, and Antioch for their copies of the acts of that council. A faucy trick it was, not only to deny the Pope's infallibility, but also to question his verity. When they received them, they find that the pretended canons were not there, and so conclude there should be no appeals from Africa to the Roman bishop. A strange boldness in this council to reverse the institution of Christ, and usurp upon St. Peter's jurisdiction, and provoke him upon whom they wholly depended for the confirmation of all their decrees. It is great pity they were not better advised. Well, you may imagine what sad tidings this was at Rome. You will desire to know what their answer is. Why then, for your satisfaction, I pray you take notice. They have a tradition at Rome. It is part of that inscription upon Seth's pillars, erected before the flood, which Josephus mentions, the counterpart whereof they have in the Vatican. That whenever his holiness is gravelled with in hard argument, and can do no good about the premises, it may be lawful for him, or others pleasing for him, or others pleading for him, to deny the conclusion. Bellarmine's words are express. The African fathers were deceived through ignorance. What pity was it that Bellarmine was not their secretary to inform them better? The African fathers did rashly, and departed from the example and obedience of their ancestors, saith Stapleton. They were naughty boys, and deserved to be whipped into better manners. The more inexcusable the Pope that did not thunder them into order by his excommunications. But why do I mention these? Behold, a greater than Bellarmine or Stapleton is here. Enter Boniface II, who thus writes in his epistle in Eusebius, an epistle owned for his by Pigius, Lindanus, Sandarus, Tyrannus, Alanus, Copus, and Harding, though Bellarmine, being urged with it, pretends it is suspected, but dare not say it was forged. Aurelius with his colleagues, whereof St. Austin was one, by the instigation of the devil, began proudly to exalt themselves against the Church of Rome. So it seems these fathers were wickedly resolved against the supremacy of the Pope, with a flector fi nequo superos acaronta movebo. And they, whom so many of the learned papists affirm to be infallibly guided by the Spirit of God, His Holiness declares they were acted by the devil.